Welcome to the Critical Therapy Antidote podcast.
What was interesting for me is I started teaching at Antioch in 2016, and that was when Trump was elected the first time. And what took me aback was the fact that I had heard that students were being excused or allowed to be excused from class in order to go to protest the election. And that immediately struck something in me that was like, I don't know that this is right. But at the time, I think I was still so immersed in the very like radical progressive. I was impacted by that. I knew something didn't feel right, but it was everywhere at the school. And I trusted Antioch because I was a student there. So I went back as my alma mater to work there, and I had really appreciated the education 20 years ago though, and it was no longer the same. But I kind of knew something was a little bit off about that. But at the same time, I think to some extent, I may have grasped on to the progressive side maybe a little bit more than I realized, because it wasn't really until I was away from teaching and working for a little while, because I had had a medical procedure. I had had some work done on my neck. I'd had some surgery on my spine. And that actually was when I stepped away and said, oh my gosh, and I could put all of these pieces together now where, okay, they're letting people leave class to go protest the fact that Trump won in 2016. There's signs all over the psychology offices where, when I first started, I was adjunct, right? So I didn't have an office. I became full-time. That was a huge honor, because to have only a master's degree and still be allowed to be a full-time professor it was unheard of. It just doesn't happen often. But they're a private school, so they can do those things. And, it just spoke a lot to what the students thought about being in my courses and how I was doing there. So of course that was a really big part of my identity at that time. But I do remember when I was hired full time that I did get an office, and that's when I started going up to the psychology department. And that's when I started to see the signs, like the literal signs that are posted, that started to bother me. There were rainbow flags everywhere. And then there were the, intolerance will not be tolerated. And I always have to kind of put my fist up. And I do that when I say that, because those posters had fists up. They were a poster that had that picture. So you immediately walk in to the psychology department, and right away there's this feeling of tension and anxiety that came over me that doesn't feel right. And I'm sitting here thinking, this is not feeling comfortable, but I'm not affected by what these people are saying or doing. I'm just here teaching my classes in this vacuum. So, and I had advisees too. And my advisees would come to me initially about, all sorts of different, I need to graduate on time. I'm missing units. I'm this and that. But at some point during this particular time period of 2016 to 2020, they were starting to come to me for something else. They were starting to report back to me what was happening in their classes. They were starting to tell me that professors were saying things like your advisor said to you. They were starting to tell me, and then I started to get white men that were coming to me and saying, okay, Christine, I went by my first name. I was never really pretentious about that stuff. But they would address me that way, and they would say, I can't talk in class. Every time I try to say something, I either need to use the caveat of, I know I'm a white man and I know I have white privilege. So let me put that out there first before I respond and for the rest of what I want to say. Right. It was absolutely, horrifying to me. And I'm thinking, why do you have to excuse? You have to you have to apologize for being a white male before you're able to say something. And that was the students that felt like they could talk. There were some that felt like they couldn't say anything at all ever. And so I became also a little bit distressed by this. And I found myself telling them, I don't think you're going to be able to change what these professors think. It's starting to become more and more, prevalent here. And I started to become really open and honest with them about what I was seeing. And I told them, I don't know how you're going to continue through this program if this is how you're feeling now, taking a couple of these classes. And there was a
Mhm.
part of me that felt somewhat like, am I stepping the line here by saying that? But I felt the need at this point to expose also. And I felt that I needed to be honest, and I felt that I needed to validate that what was happening was wrong. So I think
Mm.
those were the beginnings of something happening within me that was stirring and saying, okay, the school, it's not just me, and it's not just, a small portion of classes. It's not just the community psychology classes. Now we're talking about the classes that are actually just supposed to be teaching theory and personality theory, classes that should have
Mhm.
nothing to do with that. They were just supposed to be teaching those practices. And so I started to then feel as though something here was really wrong and we were going to
Mhm.
have a major problem. Um, I don't know how I coped with it actually at the time. And I don't know if maybe you have some feelings about that for yourself, because I want to hear your thoughts about that. But coping with it for me, I found one professor friend who I've never talked about before in this whole time that we've done these, who I don't want to give up too much about her to protect her, but she was one person I confided in who felt the same way. My coping strategy at that time was I would just go talk to her and I would just
Mm.
say, what are you doing in your class about this? What should I do? What is going
Mhm.
on with the other classes? Are the students coming to you and saying the same thing? And we would sit there and commiserate. And I mean, we would talk for hours per week about what to do. And that was my coping strategy. That's kind of how I made it through the amount of years I did. I loved teaching. That
Mhm.
component was really easy for me. But what these students were reporting and what I witnessed in the department and what I was starting to get via email about what they wanted us to start bringing into the classroom, I really didn't know what else to do other than talk to this friend. And the timing, I guess, happened to be serendipitous because around the time when it escalated, I had to take a step back and have this neck surgery and cut myself off from working altogether in order to heal. That's
Mm.
the time in which my journey of coming out and exposure, I guess, really started. So I'm curious in terms of, I mean, were you in a position where you felt like I'm going to have to find a way to cope if I'm going to get through this before you decided that you were going to expose and leave?